Well, it's halfway through the patch, and you guys know what time that means it is. My name is Irene, and I'm here with our ProGuides mid-patch update. 11.1 has been wild, and I'm here with new tier lists curated by our in-house analysts. We'll follow up on all the changes this patch and let you guys know who you need to be playing or banning out. I know you guys can't wait for those updates, so let's start off by talking about the top lane. The top lane saw a couple of changes this patch. First, let's talk about Malphite. Malphite's W and E armor ratios were reduced this patch, and surprisingly, he's actually felt noticeably weaker this patch as a result. You may or may not have noticed this, and that's because this nerf is much more noticeable in higher elo. That missing damage makes all the difference in volatile matchups, and players are able to win close fights that they previously couldn't following these nerfs. Aside from lane matchups, Malphite's damage output in teamfights is also a little bit lower. So we notice that players are sometimes able to avoid the inevitable bullet train rockets that one-shot, even if it's by surviving with only a sliver of health left. While we still think that Malphite is worthy of his placement in the OP tier, note that this is considering all ranks. In elite levels of play, we think he's an S tier pick now. Gnar is next, and he got massive buffs this patch. We moved him up to the A tier, and we still think that he belongs there. The increased utility and damage have given players the tools they need to be relevant at most points of the game. He now exudes aggressive, safe pressure that we'd expect from a ranged solo laner. With Gnar slowly coming back into the meta, you'll need a decent understanding of macro play and the top lane in general if you want to climb with him. Up until the 14th, we're actually offering 20% off ProGuides subscriptions, so if you want to start this season off strong and improve fast, check out the link in the description. Next up is the Brutal Warrior that keeps solo killing my top laners. Pantheon got a slap on the wrist nerf, and the only noticeable change are to his presence as a support. He's still OP, keep picking or banning him. Remember that if you're relying on Pantheon to climb this patch, you'll need to have a second pick handy because his ban rates are still very, very high. The biggest change we have to note for the tier list is that Darius has been moved up from the S to the OP tier. Malphite being a little weaker has lowered his ban rate slightly, and guess where those dropped bans went? You already know, it's Darius, because his ban rate has increased slightly as well. Surprisingly, Malphite was actually giving Darius a hard time last patch in high elo. Malphite clearly had the upper hand in the case of most players. This patch, the statistics indicate that it's a close to even matchup, and I'm sure when optimized great, Darius players can confidently crush Malphite players after the small nerfs he got this patch. Also, it's probably jungle difference. If you are a low elo player, you can add Garen onto the OP pick list as well. Otherwise, just consider him an S tier pick now. Players overall have an easier time utilizing Garen's simple but powerful kit, as a lot of its power comes from raw damage. Pantheon does require a little bit of proactive roaming and playmaking, so execution can be a bit more difficult, especially if you find yourself getting camped early on. Considering how often Pantheon is banned, you can definitely consider Garen as a potential pickup if you want a good pick that doesn't require a big time investment. Speaking of which, I want to ask you guys our question of the day. I have a friend who just got started this season and they've recently gotten super addicted. They actually want to start playing ranked as soon as possible. So let me know which easy champions you think are the strongest and why. I've been telling them to play Annie because she's simple and deals crazy damage, but maybe a couple of other picks, especially from other roles, wouldn't be bad to suggest. Now let's wrap up the top lane. Finally, we've also moved up Poppy into the S tier. We think that she's simply been slept on. Nothing has changed except that Malphite got nerfed. This has paved the way for another tank to shine in the top lane, and Korean players especially have begun locking in Poppy to carry their games. Although she's a tank, she has a ridiculous amount of utility and can have an incredible amount of agency in games as a result. Thus, our OP picks for the mid-patch update are Pantheon, Malphite, and Darius, followed by Aatrox, Shen, Wukong, Camille, Maokai, Poppy, and Garen. Next, let's run through the jungle. Let's kick off the jungle by talking about Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks received a small nerf to his W, but like we expected, it didn't really do that much to him. Our analysts knew that he'd remain a powerful pick in high elo, but in spite of these nerfs, Fiddlesticks is still popping off hard across every rank outside of Iron. As a side note, nobody in Iron really likes to play him, it appears, so it might just be a sample size thing. So we've moved Fiddlesticks up into the S tier, and if you're high elo, he's a borderline OP pick. Ivern also received nerfs, but like we said previously, Ivern has still gotten stronger over the past few patches as a result of his items becoming cheaper. He continues to prove himself as a powerful pick right now, and we'll leave him in the S tier. The only thing keeping us from denoting him as OP is his lower play rate. He'd need a bigger sample size of games in order to make that final judgment call. Graves got a 2 AD nerf, which will tell you guys isn't as small as you think. In spite of this, he remains a top tier pick, though weaker than before. As high elo, he remains the most picked and banned jungler in the game, and at the very least, the top of the ladder still believes he is ridiculously overtuned. and we think so too. But even in low elo, he can merit a ban because of the Smurfs. In my personal opinion, he's a slightly above average ban decision, but can definitely be worth it if you end up running into someone who's trying to gun down an entire lobby and 1v9 with him. Taliyah has ended up decently weaker for the majority of players, but high elo players continue to dominate the jungle with her. We'll continue to noting her as an S tier pick, but know that you can find an easier time carrying games in gold and below with more straightforward champions like Rammus or even Hecarim. Following his nerfs, Master Yi has actually seen drastic decreases in his win rates. Our analysts underestimate the cooldown nerf on his Q, and we've had to drop him down a tier. Even in lower ranks where he's the legend that can save your elo, Master Yi has fallen off a tad bit. We'll say he's still an S tier low elo pick, but barely right now. For most players, especially if you're high elo, you should probably stay away from him because you sacrifice so much early pressure just by picking him now. Our analysts have made one final change to their tier list, and that's moving Karthus up from the B to the S tier. Riot themselves stated they believed Karthus' win rate would rise naturally as players better optimized him. And they were right. Without really touching him, his win rates have continued to rise, and it's clear that he's much stronger than anyone first perceived. Pick him up right now before he catches on, because with the weeks to come, we're certain that Karthus will become a popular ban. In the jungle, we have Olaf, Graves, Kha'Zix, and Nunu as our OP picks, followed by Evelynn, Rammus, Echo, Hecarim, Kayn, Taliyah, Elise, Ivern, Fiddlesticks, and Karthus in the S tier. Hecarim is on the border of OP, so take note of that if you enjoy playing him. With that said, it's mid lane time. First up, let's talk about the small buff Qiyana got. For the majority of players, she still continues to underperform. In high elo, however, she's even stronger than before. You'll need to interpret this information for yourself because the results based on rank are very polarizing. In gold and lower, she averages around a 45% win rate, while in high diamond, she gets close to the 54% mark. We attribute this to the fact that a lot of Qiyana's power stems from her incredible roaming power. With excellent macro play, you can absolutely make Qiyana work, but without strong fundamentals, game sense, and the ability to lane effectively, you won't be able to make the most out of Qiyana as a pick. We'll move her up to the S tier, but be very careful with this placement. You need to put in the time and be able to play to her strengths to get the most out of her. Ryze received a minor buff to his mana costs. Unfortunately, he hasn't seen much change as a result. His win rates have gone up, but only slightly, so we'll leave him in the B tier. Yasuo and Yone saw some big changes to their passives this patch. While their win rates have dropped, we think that this is because of how dramatically it affected their build paths. As players optimize, we think they'll come back even stronger than before, and thus believe that they should still remain as S tier picks. Our mid lane tier list remains unchanged otherwise. Like our analysts predicted, Echo, Pantheon, Anivia, and Fizz are still the clear powerhouses this patch. The S tier is comprised of Zed, Akali, Victor, Echo, Annie, Katarina, Galio, Malphite, Yone, Yasuo, Seraphine, and Qiyana. Zed is still a relevant S tier pick. With the nerfs to Duskblade, he's clearly weaker than before. We're also ready to let you guys know that Katarina is a potential OP pick, but it's extremely subjective. On North America, for example, where the average ping is much higher, it honestly makes all the difference. Katarina is dominating Korean solo queue now with a new AD build based around the Blade of the Ruined King and Kraken Slayer combo. One important note is that you do not have to run this build. It's a great option to use against tankier enemy teams and if you prefer longer extended fights. With nerfs to burst itemization, Katarina has come out a bit stronger this patch as the items in this specific build have been left untouched. However, like I've said, the ping difference is already a very discouraging factor, and thus not as many players are willing to give her a try on certain servers. Now with the mid lane covered, let's talk about the bot laners next. We'll start off the bot lane by talking about Sivir, who continues to underperform. We feel bad saying this, but she still seems a bit weak, albeit better than before. We think we'll keep her in the C tier, but in Silver and Gold, where she's the most popular, we think she's a passable pick. Her ultimate is a great way to turn the tides in those inevitable ARAMs that happen on Summoner's Rift, and it gives teams a very clear set of instructions. Either run towards your enemies, or run for your life. The fact that your team should know they have to do something with it is enough to get things going. Varus also got buffed, but just like Sivir, he continues to underperform. In his case, we still advise against picking him as there are plenty of other picks that can just do what he does. If you want more damage, pick Hyper Carries, or Jhin. If you still want the utility, you can pick Jhin or Ashe. And the same goes for Xayah, buffed but still weak. Although she's performing noticeably better than before, we'll keep Xayah in the C tier as well. Our analysts were on the fence about moving Kalista up to the A tier this patch. Like they predicted, those Runan Hurricane buffs have come in clutch. Although unpopular still, Callista is proving to be a pretty good pick in high elo specifically. Callista is a niche pick right now, but when paired with an aggressive support, the early game pressure can be enough to create leads and snowball through towards quick victories. We'll leave her in the B tier, but high elo folks should note that she's arguably a situational A tier pocket or counter pick. We'll continue monitoring her performance specifically to see if we should move her up on the tier list altogether, and we'll let you guys know next patch as our analysts gather more data. With no other changes to note, our OP bot lane picks are Kai'Sa, Jhin, and Miss Fortune, followed by Samira, Ashe, and Vayne in the S tier. A very short list of S tier picks. It's worth mentioning that there are a lot of good picks, like in our A tier, but very few excellent ones. Make sure to fight for one of our top 3 picks, because you'll usually find that 1 or 2 between Miss Fortune, Kai'Sa, and Jhin are still open, because people are still banning Samira every other game. Finally, let's wrap it up with supports. Just one change to follow up on supports, let's talk about Karma. She got a massive buff to her late game E, but like we thought, things are still rough. I'm sorry for you Karma mains out there, but I'm certain that your time will come in a future patch. We'll leave Karma in the C tier for now as she continues to underperform across every rank. There are plenty of other champions that have way more meaningful utility, and we're talking about both enchanters who can provide more assistance as well as aggressive crowd control oriented supports that can go for big plays. Oh my god, Maokai's support win rate has exceeded 53%. But let's just try to ignore me saying that so that players don't ban him and I can collect my freelo. In other news, Seraphine is proving to be a power pick on the Western servers. She's arguably OP tier, but I'd like to ask our European friends about that one. EU West is her most popular server, and there are a good amount of players who think she's absolutely broken right now. I personally think she's a borderline pick, but the Korean servers would beg to differ. Regional differences definitely exist, but this is one I can't completely pin on latency issues. Okay, one change you guys might groan about is that we've bumped Rel up into the A tier. Yes, we just moved her down, but there are 3 reasons why we've backtracked. 1, players are obviously getting better at her. 2, and probably a bigger reason, is that she's being picked as a counter to many other tank supports. Locket of the Iron Solari is an even stronger item this patch because burst items were nerfed, and of course, the shield can be broken by Rel, and her win rates against meta picks like Thresh and Leona are quite impressive, especially taking into account how broken those guys are. Third, she got a bug fix, so her E works properly now, so you can expect her allies to benefit from her defensive bonuses. Also, those Pantheon nerfs this patch hurt him as a support, so we moved him down to the A tier. To conclude, we've got Leona, Lulu, Thresh, and Maokai in our OP tier, followed by Bard, Morgana, Nami, Janna, Alistar, Brand, Nautilus, and Seraphine in the S tier. With that, we'll wrap up our mid-patch update. Thank you guys for watching, and if you want to receive notifications for videos like this, as well as other informational content, hit that sub button. We're constantly uploading content to help you guys improve, and want to continue doing so. That said, I wish you guys the best of luck on Summoner's Rift. Most importantly, stay safe during these times.